We've got
we
me.
Can hear you.
Excellent. My name is Sean Kearney. I'm a Senior Solutions Architect here at Systel Technology, where we've done numerous deployments of Surface Pro devices within enterprise clients. And my boss, Colin's going to take you through all the lessons learned and all the bits and pieces you need to do this within your environment. Now, you may see some poll questions on your screen. Please follow and answer them if you could, and give us some more details about where you stand with Surface and technology within your environment. Colin, take it away.
Thank you, Sean. As Sean said, we've done a lot of Surface deployments, some in production, some proof of concept throughout Canadian enterprise clients. So that's Sean. He's my moderator. He'll be the guy managing the stream if you guys have any questions. He got some pretty good answers to a lot of this stuff because he was involved in virtually all of our deployments to date. That's me. You don't need to know too much about me. You don't need to see my face. Just listen and watch the slides. And you guys are actually a little bit behind on the stream, but just a quick introduction and an overview. Why are we talking about the Surface? Deployment and provisioning, there are some interesting caveats that I'll cover. The Windows Store, it's a question we get asked a lot. How to improve the user experience, and then we'll get into questions. And you can ask questions throughout the session. If I'm actually in the same room as Sean, he's projecting his screen, so if I see a question come up that makes sense to answer at the time of the session, I'll do that. If not, we'll save them for the end. I've definitely got enough time at the end to cover session questions. And without any further ado, I'll move ahead. So why the Microsoft Surface? Tablets have been around for quite a few years now. You know, people are very enamored with them. You see them everywhere. People have been using laptops for a long time as well, and they use that for typically content creation, and they've used tablets for content consumption. That's been the paradigm so far. People love the convenience of a tablet, but they want the power of a laptop. And when tablets came on the scene, I know that when I got my first tablet, I would still travel with my laptop and bring my tablet along to read or watch a video or on the plane or on the train or in my hotel room. But when I wanted to get some real work done, I had to pull out my laptop. And so it didn't become a convenience as much because I had to carry multiple devices. And I know that many other people had similar issues. So that's really the problem statement that the Surface was trying to address. So in the proof of concepts we've done and some of the pilots we've done, we've come across a lot of interesting things, a lot of organizations with misconceptions about the Surface or about tablets and management in general. So I wanted to share some of those with you up front and then dive in a little bit deeper. So one of the big lessons we learned was that you need to understand the user's needs, their wants, and use cases. And sometimes needs and wants aren't necessarily the same. A customer may want something or the end user may want something, but they need something else. And having the IT department figure out what they need isn't always the best solution. So there's a workforce analysis piece that we tend to do up front. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that, but just want to let you know about it. And what we do is we go through use case scenarios for different types of personas. We don't say an individual user or in a specific job function, but someone who travels and attends a lot of meetings. That could be a salesperson, it could be a senior executive. What type of scenarios do they find themselves in? Whether it's a meeting room, whether it's whether it's a hotel room, whether they're in an airport, what types of things are they trying to do? Taking the device out of the equation and then mapping the requirements back to the device mix that you might be able to present to them as an IT department. The other thing that we see organizations failing at is they're trying to use a premium device. Surface is truly a premium device. If you take a look at the price tag and what Microsoft is trying to achieve with it. They take a premium device, but they forget about creating a premium experience for their users. And what I mean by that is they don't necessarily provide them with all the right accessories or training. As you may be aware, the Surface Pro doesn't come standard with a keyboard. You've got to buy the keyboard separately. Worked with one organization that bought 10 Surface Pros for a pilot, only bought one keyboard. So some of their users weren't getting the experience that they could have from it. They weren't getting the best of both worlds of that tablet and the laptop experience. They didn't have the right accessories. Notice if you've looked at a Surface, and I'll show you some images in a few minutes, there's no Ethernet port on it. So you're now limited to Wi-Fi. And if you don't have Wi-Fi in your meeting rooms or in the locations that your users are going to be using them, well, you may not be having the best user experience. Those types of things. Also supporting infrastructure. It's a great device for definitely Wi-Fi, as I mentioned, Miracast or WiDi, docking stations, monitors. Now, it's a touch device. It's a DisplayPort device, and if you don't have monitors that can take advantage of that, you're going to have a subpar experience with that. So just taking these things into account. Are you using it as a companion or replacement device? What we found is using it as a companion device actually helps the pilot to fail, because people are jumping between devices. They can't figure out how to do something on the Surface. They then go back to their desktop or other laptop, and then they're jumping between. They don't have the data, so they keep using the old device. We found it's if you take a short period of time to get people accustomed to the device, you'll have a much better experience long term, because they figure out how to do the things they need to do. And part of that figuring out is the training and those use case scenarios to help them out with cheat sheets and things like that. Again, another failure we've seen is some organizations have a goal of trying to convince people not to use their iPads but to use the Surface instead. They don't do the same thing, and having that as an objective or part of your pilot can definitely lead to some dissatisfied users and a failed pilot. The other thing too is definitely include some use cases that aren't possible aren't possible with an iPad. If you can do that, the users are going to find that there's really some productivity benefits that they can get out of it, and they'll be much more prone to use the device. Get security on board. We've had some security departments that weren't up to speed on what the Surface devices were. That was especially earlier on when they were less prevalent. What we were seeing is, it's a tablet. It's got a whole set of restrictions placed on it. And as we know, the Surface Pro can be a domain-joined device, and it can be managed in many of the same ways as other domain-joined devices. It's got things like BitLocker. We've got a full Office suite and Outlook. So in many ways, the security policies that you have in place for laptops may be sufficient. Treating it as purely as a tablet with restrictions like no corporate data, etc., that some organizations have, can be an issue. So you want to get security involved up front. And key is have measurable objectives and success criteria, so you know whether your pilot's going well or not. I didn't want to spend too much more time on that. Those are just some of the lessons learned. I want to jump into the technology a little bit and show you some of that. I noticed we've got some poll questions up. Can we take a quick peek at those, Sean? So the reason I ask these questions is, where are we going? Especially about familiarity with technology is, throughout the rest of the session, I'm going to be talking about a few things. I'm going to be talking about Active Directory and group policy. I'm going to be talking about MDT and SCCM. And I just want to know how many of you are familiar with those things. It looks like most of you are familiar with group policy. Good. You don't have to be an expert in any of these technologies throughout the session, but I will show some examples. If you have questions about them in detail, you can ask them in the stream, try to answer them at the end, or Sean can answer them in the session. Can we take a look, Sean, at the poll results for the Surface in use? So one of the other things that we've found is organizations are piloting Surfaces or deploying Surface devices to their end users, and they're not necessarily giving their IT staff or the people that have to support them access to the device. So it becomes very difficult. They're under the impression it's just another Windows device, and our IT folks are smart. They can solve this. What we're seeing is that a lot of organizations aren't able to support them that way. So let's move ahead. The device dilemma. Last week at Ignite, although it had been announced for quite some time, the Surface 3 was launched, and the Surface 3 is a little smaller, a little lighter. It's fanless compared to the Surface Pro 3. So a lot of organizations are asking themselves, which is the right device for us, right? How do we compare them? Is the i3 more powerful than the Surface 3? The i7, we understand that's the top-end device. Where does it fit? So there's really a continuum, the continuum of the pure tablet, or I call the tablet-y end of the spectrum, right? Somebody put that in Urban Dictionary for me, tablet-y, and the other end is laptop-y. And so if you need a laptop, more than you want a tablet, or more than you need a tablet, the higher end devices on the Surface Pro, the i7 would be at the top end of that range, and then the Surface 3 would really be at the bottom end of that range. But it's great for task workers who aren't creating a lot of content, maybe where you use the keyboard very rarely, maybe for a POS solution. If you need LTE, it's really your only option, and if price is an issue for you. So again, portability over power for the Surface 3, and if you want to have a premium experience as close to a laptop as possible with also that tablet-y feel, then you're looking at the Surface Pro 3 and possibly the i7, which, by the way, that's what I'm presenting on right now. So one of the things we found helped us in our pilots, our initial pilots, we learned the hard way, is we didn't give the end users a good tour of the device and really help them understand all the different pieces. A lot of that happened to do with the fact that they were iPad users, and they said they can figure out a tablet. They figured out the iPad on their own. Just give me the device, let me get going, and that was a mistake. One of the things we found was important to do is give them an overview of the device and some of the challenges they may have, how to do certain things. So, for instance, using the pen, because other tablets don't necessarily come with a pen, and how it works, what you need to do with it, what you can do with the pen, where to store it, whether you can use a pen loop or not. We found a lot of lost pens. Sorry, found that a lot of pens were lost. I've lost a couple myself, so that's one right there. How to use the kickstand, what to do if you need a microphone because there's only one jack and it's a combo jack, things like that. So I'm not going to go through this in detail, but giving your end users a cheat sheet or a quick session on the actual physics and physical use of the device, that's really important. The docking station, again, that's another one that's pretty interesting, especially because it uses a different power adapter than the Surface itself. But what we've seen is people not knowing how to unlock the device from the dock. It's a sliding mechanism. We had one where somebody tore the Surface device right out of the dock because they didn't know how to get it out. They just grabbed and pulled. And I hope they had Microsoft Complete on that. But I'm not sure how they ended up solving that, but we did have a mangled device and a mangled dock. So again, helping your users to understand the hardware can really help accelerate adoption and satisfaction. So again, is the Surface a tablet or an Ultrabook? Well, we know it's a hybrid, and a lot of organizations feel that they can just manage it the same way that they manage other Windows devices, right? Well, there are some differences. For a lot of organizations, this is probably the first or one of the first UEFI devices that they have to manage. So there's some special considerations that come along with UEFI. I'm not going to get too deeply into the UEFI space, but I will talk about some of the things specific to managing Surface Pro devices in the enterprise because they are UEFI devices. Your provisioning, whether you're using MDT or configuration manager task sequences, there's some special attention there. I'll talk about that a little bit more. And of course, along with the fact that it is a domain-joined Windows device, it also has the same baggage that others in the other devices have, like how do you manage apps from the Windows Store, and I'll talk about that as well. So let's start with provisioning and deployment for this section, I will be talking a little bit more deeply about MDT, group policy objects, and configuration managers. Many of you know it as SCCM. If those are things that are not of concern to you, now's a good time to go get a coffee or soft drink and come back in about 10 minutes. So, if you're using MDT, you're doing light touch deployments, I stole a bunch of bullet points from my friend Niall Brady. He's also a enterprise client management MVP. He has a great blog site called Windows Noob. I'm sure many of you have seen it. It's the first place I go to when I want to find out how to do something in a nice step-by-step manner. What I did is I collapsed a lot of his info into these 10 points. Much of it is very similar to what you would do with a standard MDT deployment or light touch deployment for a Windows device. But first thing you have to be aware of is that the OS that you're using when you must be a 64-bit UEFI capable OS. So Windows 8.1 is. You need to create a driver package for the Surface Pro, and that's become a little easier. Microsoft's made that available now, not just through Windows Update. That was the original vector for getting driver updates. Now you can get it as an MSI package. I'll talk more about that a little later. And, of course, create the task sequence like you would normally using the WIM and the driver packages you'd previously created. Sorry, I've got an error in there about advertising that task sequence. But, again, one of the key things is you need to use a USB LAN adapter. There is no Ethernet port on the Surface device. So you need to have some way of connecting back to the network. It could be your docking station. There could be a USB adapter. Okay, create that bootable media. Now, you're probably going to want some other items connected, right? You're going to have your USB key, and there's only one USB port on the standard Surface device. So you're going to want a dock or some kind of a USB hub to help out with that. And of course, a USB 3 would be the best way to go for that. If you need to do a Pixie boot or a boot from media, sorry. If you need to do a boot from media, there's a special key sequence. I've got that here. It's holding down the volume down button and press the power once. While that's held down, you wait for the loading file screen, and off you go. And you'll then be booted into Windows PE on your bootable media. Select the task sequence that you want to run, and off you go, much like you would with a regular MDT deployment. A few things just to be aware of. Like I said, you need that USB hub or some other way of getting your NIC on there. If you have questions about this, we'll take those at the end. We'll probably answer some of them as we go through the rest of these slides. Oh, hey, thanks, Dave. So one of the things we've found is, especially with the number of drivers that have been deployed over the last year for the Surface devices, there can be conflicts. I've seen organizations, a lot of people can do this successfully. They dump all their drivers into MDT. They don't necessarily filter them, and they let plug and play figure out which driver to use. That can work. However, I've seen a lot of interesting things happen. Microsoft's tweaked some of the drivers for the Surface Pro. So, for instance, the display is an Intel display, a display adapter. However, Microsoft's got its own driver for the Surface, and you may not get the proper driver selected. And even the slight differences between different versions of the Surface have slight differences in drivers, and so plug and play isn't always the best way to go. So what we suggest is using MS Info 32, take a look here at the actual information that it comes back with for your device and create an MDT filter for your drivers to make sure that the drivers for the proper device are being applied in your task sequence. That can avoid a lot of troubleshooting down the road. So if you're doing a zero touch, you've added configuration manager or you've extended MDT in some way, there's a couple of other things that you need to be aware of. Remember, again, I said that the Surface is a UEFI device. It's a Class 3 UEFI device, so there's some special considerations. WDS, you need to be on at least Windows Server 2008 R2 or better, and you need to have a Server 2012 boot image. So the recommendation really is to go with Windows Server 2012 R2 and use a 2012 R2 boot image as well. Otherwise, your device won't be able to do a network boot. Also, if you've got DHCP scope options in use, they will, because the DHCP scope option actually provides a boot file or a direction to a boot file. You can't use it for both BIOS-based and UEFI-based systems. So the solution for that is to use either IP helpers or to not mix BIOS and UEFI devices on the same subnets. And again, we've run into those issues before, and they were tough to troubleshoot. So now that you've got it here, hopefully you won't run into that. Again, Pixie boot, provide some instructions there. Some people couldn't figure out how to do a Pixie boot on the Surface device. And another big issue, if you're using Configuration Manager, as you know, Configuration Manager uses the MAC address to help uniquely identify devices. And if you're in a staging area using the same docks over and over, or using the same USB NICs over and over, guess what? Configuration Manager is going to get confused. So I've provided a link to a script that you can use to help clean that out so that you can continue with your deployments in the staging area without having to change your hardware that supports it. So there's some tools that you might find useful. There's a Surface firmware tool. It's part of the latest bundle. It's in the MSI. You can deploy that. If you deploy that to your machine, so you can add that in your task sequence or deploy it in any other way that you choose to, what it allows you to do is control the UEFI firmware remotely or en masse, either through Configuration Manager or some other mechanism. You don't have to touch each of those devices individually. So what kinds of things can you do with that tool? Well, you can change the boot order. You can enable or disable specific things like the TPM, network boot, the USB port, things like that, the cameras, the audio. So it gives you a lot more control over the device, and especially in enterprise, you can do this centrally through your task sequences or through PowerShell and Configuration Manager after the fact. Just something to be aware of, that you do have that control. So let's move on. We've got our devices deployed, our end users are using them, they're loving them, and because it's a tablet, it's got an application store, right? So Android devices have Google Play or Amazon. There's all sorts of other app repositories. iOS devices typically use the iTunes App Store, and of course our Windows devices have the Microsoft Store. So that works great. Tablets were typically designed and rolled out as end-user devices. So if you've got a single user on a single device with a single account for the application store, guess what? It's really easy to go and grab applications. In the Microsoft world, you'd have to have some sort of a Microsoft account, like what we used to call live IDs, connect to the store, get free apps, or add a credit card and buy apps. That works great as an individual user, but how do you do that at the enterprise level? If I've got 30,000 users and I want to give them a specific application, that doesn't really scale well. I've got to have everybody using a Microsoft ID. I've got to give them credit card numbers or gift cards or something. Not a scalable solution. So what I'm going to do is one of two things, right? I'm either going to sideload the applications, so I can preload them into my image if I want to. Requires a certificate. The code has to be signed. And if it's not in my image and I want to add it to a device after the fact, I can distribute APPX bundles. That's another file type. It's actually really a zip file with that's been renamed. So if you get access to an APPX file, if you rename it to .zip, you can open it up with any of the archiving tools and take a look inside it. It's got a standard file structure with the application and data portions all mapped out for you. You can take a look at that and play around with that. And then we can distribute it with Configuration Manager as well if we need to. One of the problems with that is, unless you're building applications in-house, is getting that APPX bundle. Those applications that you get from the Windows Store, it's very difficult to get the APPX bundle yourself. That's changing. There's a couple of ways. So I'm not suggesting anyone necessarily do this, but you can use tools like Fiddler to capture the stream and grab the APPX file and then redistribute it. You have to be aware of the licensing restrictions on that application, but that's one way of getting the APPX file. Another option, instead of sideloading, is to use a deep link. Right? The deep link, you have to get the application once and associate the application with the user. It's not truly silent, but you can actually trigger the installation for the user in the user context, and the user may have to provide some input. That's another option for applications in the store. And of course, you can restrict or allow specific applications with AppLocker. And if you want to block store access, you can do that with GPO. So let's take a look at how we would do some of those things. So if you want to use GPO for restricting access to the App Store, the first thing you need to do, you need to add the desktop experience to one of your domain controllers. And that's done through the features when you're managing your machine, you're managing your server. Once you have that, we can create a GPO to manage the store. I've provided the URL there, and you can see that you can either turn a store application on or off. So it's not very difficult. There's a template for it. The path is provided here. You don't have to struggle through finding it. It's right there for you to grab and go. If you want to do some more interesting things, so again, it's like the typical GPO. You have to get used to the reverse logic about what happens when you enable versus disable. And if you read that carefully, you'll see that enabling this setting access to the store is denied, right? So you're enabling to deny. But just like all the other GPO templates, once you get used to it, you should be okay. So sounds like a lot of trouble and doesn't seem to solve all of my use cases. And you're right. Windows 10 store, so it was covered last week. They've been talking about it for a long time, but a lot more details were provided at Ignite, and you've seen a lot more blog posts and analyst reports about how it's going to work. So Microsoft is making the Windows Store much more enterprise friendly. First off, you can use an enterprise or an organization MSA. What's an MSA? Microsoft accounts. Right. It's not tied to an individual user, so I don't have to have all of my users using Microsoft accounts. I can create one that's not necessarily a personal one, but it could be my company .com, and that can be registered and can be used by more than one person, or can outlive a particular individual's tenure at your organization. So if somebody leaves, we have no issues there propagating and continuing to use that account for access to the Windows Store. We can do bulk purchasing, so I can buy 30,000 copies. I will get the APPX bundle so that I can use Configuration Manager or other tools to deploy it. And one of my favorite new features that I'm really looking forward to is the ability to create a corporate store. What that means is that within the Microsoft Store, I can create some boundaries so my users only see the apps I want them to see. So I can choose apps that they can see from specific vendors, specific applications that I've selected, and I can add custom apps that are only available to my users. So if I've got in-house apps that I've built or apps that I've customized, I can make them available in the Windows Store, and that's all they see. So I call it a boutique. It would be my.org boutique, as an example, and that's all they see. Works the same way the Windows Store works. Really looking forward to that. So, how do we improve the user's experience, right? Again, like I said earlier, we're spending a lot of money on some premium devices. We want our users to get the most out of them. We want them to be productive, and we want them to enjoy the devices. We don't want them to say, you know, I wish I had a different device. So how do we get past some of those roadblocks? Well, one of the things that makes the tablets fun to use, and again, you'll have to pass this through your security office, make sure it's something that makes sense for you, is picture password, right? That can, especially if you don't have the keyboard attached and you're trying to enter a complex keyboard, picture password is an option. Again, I've shown the GPO template so that you can enable or disable that. I use that on my device, and I find it's a very quick and what I feel secure way to access my device. One of the interesting things is, how would you brute force a picture password remotely? I'm not quite sure you could. So again, the information on how to enable that is there. Organizations will want to either enable or disable that as per their requirements. Power management. One of the things that the early Surface devices were slammed for was that the battery just wasn't good enough. You couldn't get through an entire day. And the Surface Pro 3, you can definitely get through a day, but a lot of people are finding that they're not able to for a number of reasons. And there's some fine-tuning that we can do to help them. So I would imagine that most of you, when you do provisioning of your corporate devices, you've got a standard image that you deploy. That's a great way to make things much more manageable. However, the Surface Pro 3 has something called Connected Standby. Connected Standby is a special power saving mode. So for if you close the keyboard, machine goes to sleep. And if you walk to a meeting room, so if you left your desk, you walk to a meeting room, you open it up again, and since it's in sleep mode, it'll come back really, really quickly. And that gives you that tablet experience without having to go through a full boot cycle and come back from hibernation. What it will do is, after 4 hours in sleep, it'll go to hibernate. So if you put it to sleep on Friday night, you're not going to find you have a dead battery on Monday morning. After 4 hours, it will hibernate, and Monday morning your device will be available to you, but it'll come back from hibernate, so it'll take a little longer. What happens is, when most people create their custom images on a VM or whatever their custom Windows 8.1 image is, they don't typically have the Connected Standby options available, and what you're going to do is break some of those power saving and usability enhancements that Microsoft's added to the Surface. So there's a KB that's worth reading. Gives you some commands that you can add to your provisioning to help with that, to put that back. Another thing to avoid, Chrome. And this isn't Microsoft slamming Chrome. This is just the way that Chrome works. Because Chrome is more than just a browser. It's, as Google says, it's also an OS. It actually wakes up the CPU 1,000 times per second. And that's per tab. So the more tabs of Chrome that you have open, the more that you're pounding on your CPU and the more battery that you're going to be consuming. You'll find that your device gets a lot hotter. You'll find that the fan goes on a lot. And again, Chrome is not your friend if you care about your battery. So I've had to stop using Chrome. I did use it for a few specific applications, but I found that since I stopped using Chrome, my battery life has pretty much doubled. Another thing to look at is turning off auto brightness. The reason for that is most people can find a level that they're comfortable with, and they don't have to change it a lot. As shadows pass by your window, a cloud goes by or a vehicle goes by and lighting conditions change, you're going to find your display changing brightness all the time, and oftentimes it'll be brighter than it needs to be, and also the power required to keep that function running is a battery drain. So something to consider, turning off auto brightness, and educate users on turning off features they don't need. A great way is using airplane mode when you don't need to be online. If you're always looking for a Wi-Fi access point or something like that, you're going to be chewing through your battery. A little bit of discipline, a little bit of education can really help you get a lot more out of the device from a battery standpoint. Okay, what's next? Okay, so done a lot of slides now. I thought I'd do a few demos. Every new device, in order for it to be successful, needs a killer app, right? And the killer app for the Surface has really been OneNote. Lots has been written on OneNote. There's lots of great blogs on what you can get out of it. I've got one about some of my favorite things in OneNote. I'm going to show you a couple of things in OneNote that I like. I'm going to show you some other interesting things in Office and PDFs. So if you've got senior executives that are using these devices, these are the types of things that if you show them some of these things that they may not be aware of, they'll start to fall in love with the device because it really opens up some new opportunities for them to do things they've never been able to do before. So I'm going to switch out of the slide deck and share some apps and show you some things. I'm not sure how long it's going to take for you to be able to see what I'm showing you, so I'm going to go pretty slow and wait for the stream to tell me that they can see the app that I'm going to demo. So here I go. Let me know when you guys can see my OneNote. Anybody seeing my OneNote yet? So notice one of the things I've done in OneNote is I've got ruled lines. So if you're going to be doing anything, remember with the pen we can write things, right? It's a lot easier to write if you've got ruled lines. You can use graph paper and things like that as well. So there's different ways to change the view to different ruled lines, but that makes it a big difference if we're going to use the device for note taking with what we call inking. The other thing we can do, hang on a sec, I need to move this. So the other thing you can do is if you do a lot of handwritten notes, but you want to then turn them to text, look, there's something here called ink to text. I can highlight it all and then go ink to text. So if I had 10 pages of notes or 10 lines of notes, I can quickly convert my handwriting to text, and that makes it much more useful for other types of input purposes. But of course, even your handwriting is searchable, even if you don't convert it. But just something there that a lot of senior executives we've worked with have found very, very powerful. Another thing I use, and this is a personal example, is shared lists or shared notebooks in OneNote. So again, I share a list like this with my wife, and when we're doing our groceries or running errands, if I happen to pick up the dry cleaning, I check that off either on my phone, could be an iPhone, could be an Android phone, or a Windows phone. She sees that checked off right away, and she doesn't bother with it. She'll go and get the yogurt and light bulbs or whatever it is she needs to get when she's at the right store. So that's another powerful feature of OneNote. It's been around for a long time, but people aren't aware of it. And you could even, if you wanted to, add something to it, right? And that would get shown as well. So very, very simple. Been there in OneNote for a long time, but the portability of the Surface and with the pen, that can make a big difference. Let's drop out of OneNote now and jump into Word. So one of the things I've shown people that they find very, very powerful, especially I've worked with quite a few attorneys in large organizations, and they're reviewing contracts all the time and sending things back to their assistants to make changes. I was going to initially show you, actually that's not the right document. Let me grab the right document. Here's a document. If I want to, let me just move this out of the way. As I move close to the document, I get pens turned on, and then hang on a sec. The sharing button is hiding what I need. There we go. If I get close to the document, notice pens shows up here. If I click that, I've got different pens I can use, different color thicknesses, and then what I can do is I can mark up the document, say change this, or if I want to, I can highlight something and make a note about it. That's something that a lot of my clients have found very powerful. It's very simple. It's just using Office documents the way they've traditionally done it, but they don't have to turn on track changes and things like that. And if they're using a Surface device specifically because they can use it in tablet mode without the keyboard, then they can be a lot more productive without having to edit the document the traditional way with the keyboard. Let me show you something else interesting. If we go into a PDF, so that same document as a PDF, right? So everyone's seen this graphic, the logo for the MVP virtual conference. By the way, that guy there in the hat, that's Sean Kearney. He's our moderator today. But this is a PDF I'm in, but I can ink in a PDF. I think Sean looks better with glasses, a mustache, and a beard. But more powerful than that, and I had a document sent to me by my bank manager by about a month and a half ago, and it needed a quick signature. And she sent me the PDF. I signed it and had it back to her within 30 seconds, and she couldn't believe how quickly I did that. Right? There's the PDF. I've inked it. I've signed it. I don't have to do anything. I just close it. It's saved, and I send it back. So, again, something that a lot of use case scenarios, we talked about the personas and the understanding the use cases that they go through. Those are the types of things that can really improve the user experience, create new productivity opportunities, and create a lot of fun with a task, a mundane task they normally go through. I was talking to one of the senior counsels for a health organization who says that she's always looking through contracts, just making little notes on them. Even when she's on vacation, and it was painful to do. She had her mobile phone with her, and it wasn't easy to do. She has a Surface now, and she's sitting on a dock by a lake, able to mark up those documents. I'll show you one last thing before I jump back. The Surface app. Suggest that you get the Surface app and add it to your builds. The Surface app is free in the Windows Store. But what can we do with the Surface app? A couple of things, and this app's changing all the time. There's new features. One is the pen pressure sensitivity. I don't know about you, but I've got some pens I like more than others when I'm writing on paper. And I've got really nice cross pens and Montblanc pens that have been given to me as gifts. But my favorite is that old blue Papermate that you get 10 for $2 at Staples, which is a big box office supply store here in Canada. I just love those on paper. They work well for me. We have the ability to tune how the pen responds on the screen to make it write the way you like it to write. So I can change the curve here and I can, right? And by changing I get thinner and thicker with the same amount of pressure. So you can make it feel the way you want it to feel. Less drag, more sensitive. Also, the harder you press, the thicker the line is, right? So you can tune that, and your users might find that useful. You can also change what the top button does. These are only two options here. I use something called I use a couple of different tools, but I've customized this button so that if I'm in PowerPoint presenting, I can advance the slide by using the top button. I've got that in the FAQ that's on my blog that I'll show you guys at the end. That's one of the neat things that I've been able to do, and I enjoy using that. And I'm walking around with a pen in my pocket and just clicking it to advance my slide. Again, enable or disable the Windows button, tune your audio. There's a lot of interesting things here. I borrow a lot from the information you see here in my user education sessions. And again, user training is really part of creating that premium experience for your users, not just giving them that premium hardware. Go back to my session. And I'm going to stop presenting, go back to the slide deck. I'm going to wait a few seconds till the slide deck comes back. I'm going to talk about Miracast and a few other things when the deck does come back. Or do I need to start that deck again? There's no content right now? Okay, just give me a second to get the deck back. There we go. We got it back. Thanks. Sorry about that. Just a little bit of a lag and delay. So we talked about OneNote being the killer app. Getting your users using that, being more productive, can definitely help you out. We looked at inking in Office, inking in PDFs. There's some interesting other PDF readers that allow you to do a little bit more. They're available in the Windows Store. Talk about customizing the pen, and the other killer app or killer functionality for me, at any rate, is Miracast. Not sure if you know what Miracast is. It's not something I can really demo in this format, but Miracast is basically a wireless display. So I carry around a couple of Miracast adapters with me, go into a presentation room, don't necessarily have the right cables, especially since my Surface is a DisplayPort device with a mini DisplayPort output, and I don't know what input I need at the client site's projector. They almost all have HDMI, however, so a little HDMI adapter plugs in there. I can wirelessly display to them. I use it all the time when I travel, both for business and for pleasure. The ability to just pop the device on the back of a hotel room television and watch my content, whether it's Netflix or Hulu or whatever else. Kids love it. They know how to use it as well. Can really make the device more useful. I'm not able to advance my slides here. Hang on one sec. There we go. Now I am. So I did the demos, talked about Miracast. So again, what makes a premium experience for your users? That's having the right accessories. And go through that really quickly. So as I mentioned, we had some clients that didn't buy keyboards because they weren't standard with the device. And getting a keyboard for every Surface is probably a good idea. And even keep a few extras around. They come in lots of different colors. A mouse. Again, this is a full laptop device. You can do everything you can do on a standard laptop or a desktop. And you're going to want a mouse. Using the pen and using your fingers are great, but those are to augment the experience. The mouse is still essential for a lot of data creation. I like the Bluetooth Surface mouse. There's others that people like. There's a wedge mouse that's also got a multi-touch on it. Some people like that. There's lots of different ones, but please don't forget to give your end users a mouse. Display adapters. As I mentioned, both the docking station and the Surface Pro themselves have a mini DisplayPort output. So if you're going to other types of displays, monitors, etc., you may need some display adapters. So based on what your standard is in your organization or what you expect your users to encounter in their use case scenarios, please provide them with the proper equipment. A USB NIC, again, useful for your provisioning and deployment, but also great for scenarios where you don't necessarily have Wi-Fi and you might need to connect. Again, I'm using that right now because I wasn't comfortable presenting over Wi-Fi for this session. A USB hub. The standard Surface has a single USB 3 port, and you may want more. So a USB hub comes in handy, especially for provisioning. Wireless display adapter. I personally have two different ones. I've got the Microsoft one, which I find useful in some situations. However, it's USB powered. It's got a short leash, so you'll want to have an extension for that if you can't power it easily. There's others that have AC adapters as well. An MST hub. So if we want to drive multiple monitors, one of the easiest ways is to either use an MST hub if you don't have all DisplayPort monitors, or use DisplayPort chaining. Only the first monitor needs to support DisplayPort as a native input, but then you can daisy chain it to another monitor. And of course, it would be no fun if we didn't have a HoloLens, right? So please get all of your users HoloLens. So what else do we want to consider as part of a successful pilot? Where do people want to save their data? Where does your organization want your user to save their data if they're using OneNote? By default, OneNote's going to save to OneDrive. And so you can hit this link. It'll tell you how to change the default save locations. You don't have to keep it there. So all of these are links on how to manage some of those things. Prevent the uses of OneDrive. You may have a policy that prevents that, and that may be what's required in your organization or your industry, so there's ways to do that as well. You can also prevent OneDrive from syncing over metered connections. That's a Windows 8.8.1 feature, but again, since the Surface is running those OSs right now, that's something you may want to consider. OneDrive for Business folder redirection, that can be powerful. And the OneNote default notebook location. I know some people like to have their notebooks locally or on a shared drive somewhere else in their organization. Something to look at. So where do you get some more information? There's some great information from Microsoft, right? So there's TechNet. There's the Surface for IT Pros blog. There's the Team blog. And then there's Microsoft forums, additional resources specifically for deployment. I've listed some here for you. And then some third-party and other locations. I've listed Niall Brady's site that I mentioned earlier, a few others, and then I maintain a Microsoft Surface FAQ. You may want to look at that. You may find that useful. A lot of the information in here was pulled from these locations. With that, I'm going to switch over to questions. And there's some polls up there. So, Sean, is there any questions that we want to specifically answer now that weren't answered in the stream?
Yes, there is. There's a few you might be able to go over.
All right.
There we go. And you find some more RAM.
So there's none that have been announced, and I am under NDA. I met the engineering team. They're always looking to improve the Surface. The Surface Pro 3 had over 100 custom-made components just to fit everything into that case. So they're obviously looking at improving it, making a more premium experience as time goes on. They have to look at market share and who would buy those devices and whether it's worthwhile building them. But we're definitely not seeing the Surface team taking a break from any new design opportunities. But I'm not going to use this forum to announce any new devices. I will say that a previous CEO of Microsoft once said you'd never need more than 640K of RAM, and devices have grown beyond that since. So leave it at that. Another message. Accessibility problems. That's a specific troubleshooting note. If you're looking at troubleshooting, there's a great blog on troubleshooting the Surface post-deployment. A lot of the issues we found are custom images, typically, that break some of the functionality that is in the base Surface Pro image. Driver issues, again, if you're not filtering for drivers in your task sequences, there's a good chance you're not getting the appropriate drivers on those devices, and that would cause a lot of Wi-Fi issues and other and video issues. There were in the early days of the Surface Pro 3 a lot of Marvell Wi-Fi issues, but those have been pretty much solved in the last 4 or 5 months. Any other questions in the stream? Sean, do we have any others? Robert, I'm going to need a little bit more detail about your sysprep issue. I don't think I can necessarily solve it here. You can feel free to email me, and we can try to solve that for you, but I can't really solve a sysprep question like that without a lot more details. So Amy's talking about Wicked as an option for, back to that question there, Sean. So Amy Casto asked about Wicked as an alternative to provisioning with a NIC dongle. Yeah, Wicked is going to be available. It's not released yet. It should be available Windows 10 timeframe. You can use provisioning pack, so you don't actually have to change your base OS. You can just create a provisioning pack to create the delta between where the device is and where you want it to be. That would be a great topic. That's probably worth a whole 50-minute session on its own. Amy, that's a great idea. However, Wicked's not available yet. I take it you were at Ignite. Arc Touch Mouse has Bluetooth. Yep, there's a Surf. So that's Tomaz. Yes, there are multiple versions of the Arc mouse. And there's one that's called the Surface Edition, and it is Bluetooth, and it works great. Dawn, slides. All these slides will be available for download. Yes. Yeah, Robert, why not get the drivers right before deployment? I agree. So that's what I was talking about, filtering drivers and using the MS info to get the exact device and model info for creating your filters and getting the right drivers on. And I think I'm running out of time. The script to remove the Mac from Config Manager. Yeah, so Robert asked if I post the blog URL. Yeah, I can. We can post it in the stream if you like. Sean, you want to grab that? You can just grab that from my blog, Sean. The last blog post I wrote on my personal blog has it, but the slides also have it, and these slides are going to be available. So we're going to post that right there. All right, that's going to be in the stream in a couple of seconds there. No, there you go. Sean's posting that right now.